You've probably heard this question before. It's a very common one in internet comic spaces. Is Rorschach from Watchmen a hero? Unfortunately, it's also a very silly question. Not because the question is silly per se, but because the argument that results is very, very silly. Someone will say, for instance, Rorschach is my favorite character in Watchmen because he's the only one that acts heroic. And then someone else, as if it wasn't the most obvious thing in the world, will say, but actually Rorschach is a deranged, smelly hobo. How can you like a deranged, smelly hobo? This comment is usually followed by someone posting Alan Moore stating that he can't stand Rorschach fans, and it creates a very silly back and forth because the argument is ultimately less stance versus stance and more a big miscommunication. Allow me to attempt to clear some of this miscommunication. First off, there are no heroes in Watchmen. At best, you have anti-heroes, emphasis on the anti. If you want a story about heroes who are pushed to their moral limits while still remaining heroic at the core, might I recommend the very excellent Squadron Supreme by Mark Gruenwald? In many ways, it's a superior deconstruction of superheroes than Watchmen because it's actually about superheroes. The characters in Watchmen aren't superheroes. They're mentally disturbed men and women who LARP at being superheroes as a way to cope with their neurotic hang-ups and Cold War fatalism. The satirical point of Watchmen is that, in real life, superheroes often represented and continue to represent an oversimplistic solution to real-world problems. Here's the hero. Watch him punch a villain that represents the concept of crime, or the concept of Nazis, or the concept of commies. Problem solved with just a bloodied face. But in real-life violence often only leads to further violence. The war on drugs didn't stop drugs. The war on terror didn't stop terror. A stronger, more loving world cannot be created by violence. Thus, the characters in Watchmen represent the failure of simplistic violence to impact lasting positive change in the world. The comedian represents the failure of geopolitical violence, of CIA coups and assassinations. The Minutemen and Rorschach represent the failure of traditional superheroic street violence, of punching out drug dealers and pimps to clean up the streets. And Ozymandias represents the failure of ultimate martial violence, the kind of violence of an atomic bombing or war. Ozymandias represents the violence of George Bush, the violence of every politician that says, just one more war, just one more bomb, just one more pile of dead civilians, and we will have peace in our time. Part of why Watchmen fails as a superhero deconstruction is that it doesn't address the inherent pacifism and restraint that's been present since Superman first pulled his punches against racketeers in the 40s. Everyone has very, very bloody hands in Watchmen. There are no heroes in Watchmen, as I said, but that doesn't mean Rorschach doesn't come the closest to being one. Think of Rorschach like Judge Dredd or Mad Max. If you held up Judge Dredd or Mad Max to, so say, Captain America, they wouldn't look very heroic. They'd look like crazy people. But under the constraints of their story, under the limitations of the universe they inhabit, they are heroic. They struggle, sacrifice, and make their worlds just a little bit better. When someone says Rorschach is a hero, they aren't saying he's a hero like Superman or Captain America. They're saying that within the parameters of Watchmen, if anyone can be a hero, it's him. And why do they say this? Well, just compare his motivation for being a costume street fighter to his contemporaries. The comedian did it for kicks, money, power, and sexual thrills. Silk Spectre did it because her mom forced her to, and for sexual thrills. Night Owl did it because it gave him a sense of control in a world of impending nuclear annihilation, and for sexual thrills. Are you seeing a pattern here? Dr. Manhattan did it because he was just going through the motions and doing whatever people told him to do, and for sexual thrills. Ozymandias did it because he's Henry Kissinger as a gay Bond villain and maybe for sexual thrills. It's kind of ambiguous in his case. Hooded Justice did it because, okay, we get it now. But Rorschach did it because he didn't want to see another little girl fed to dogs. He legitimately doesn't want to see innocents perish from the world he lives in. Everyone in Watchmen is playing superhero. Everyone but Rorschach. He's actually trying, crazy as he is. He's trying, and that's the key point. He's got incredible underdog energy in the story. He has nothing. He lives off beans. The people he considers friends either hate him or merely tolerate him. And he is still the one to figure out Egyptomania Kissinger's plan. He is still the one to tell Dr. Blue Dick to do it. Everyone turns against him at the end to follow the plot of a guy surrounded by dead bodies and money trails linked to cutely named Egyptian shell companies, and he's supposed to be the crazy one? No. In the land of the insane, the man who tells raspberry-flavored Captain Adam